could run and would run as a Democrat pounced quickly. He said there's no way an independent can win. In 2020, the great likelihood is that an independent would just split the anti-Trump vote and end up re-electing this president. Joining me now, former White House press secretary and America First Action senior advisor, Sean Spicer. Sean, good to see you tonight.
Good to see you.
Lots of people in the pool or talking about getting in the pool on the Democratic side. Your reaction to this Howard Schultz news first?
Well, you know, I'm a Dunkin' Donuts kind of guy, but for once I'm actually excited. I'm excited about something from Starbucks. If he gets in, it would be very helpful. I think it's not, look, not all independents are created equal. And despite the clip that you played about him trying to portray himself as a centrist, he's been a huge supporter of liberal causes for decades. That's fine. He supported Hillary Clinton. That's fine. I mean, this is what makes the country great. But you can't then turn it around and start to call yourself a centrist up the middle. So him getting in would definitely be helpful to us as Republicans, because no matter what he wants to call himself, he has a long track record of supporting progressive causes and candidates that would really help us. So I am, as of this moment, going to become a big Starbucks fan.
Well, you know, I'm sure he'll be thrilled about that. He said that, you know, there's 40% of Democrats in this country. The numbers really look like 39% independent, about that 34% Democrat, 25% Republican. So, I mean, it's pretty clear that independents have grown, and people having a party affiliation has shrunk a bit in recent years. Does that create a different dynamic?
No, and again, two things that I need to go back on. One is, as I said, all independents aren't created equal. You've got folks on the right and folks on the left that come in and just don't align with the party. That doesn't necessarily make them all the same, right? So in this case, he's coming into this race basically as a progressive Democrat that just doesn't want to go through their system. I understand that, but that's who he is. That's vastly different from, say, another candidate who might get in from a business background that's been more on the right, which would take away, for instance, in '92, you had Perot that I think pretty much skewed a little bit more to the right in terms of who he took from than the left. In this case, I definitely think he would take a lot more from the Democrats and help the Republicans. But the second thing that I think is also missing in this is that when you look at the numbers very rawly, as you did, which is how many people are registered, it looks like independents are up there. But when you actually break down independents, which is something that we did extensively at the RNC, we assigned a voter score to every single voter, you find that there's a lot of people who may not want to call themselves a Republican or a Democrat, but they have voted pretty much their lifetime as a Republican or a Democrat. They just don't like the label. So when you really drill down on most voters, they may not want to call themselves or align with a particular party, but they're truly not independents that get swayed each election. Generally speaking, they align with the party the majority of time.
All right. So to this question about who are we that Kamala Harris posed, David Frum writes this about how Democrats win in the Atlantic. He said, you want the candidate with the broadest possible appeal, not the most sectarian. Trump will be beaten not by his fiercest enemies, but by his softest supporters. You want to appeal to them, detach them, not chatter on social media about how you'd like to punch their kids in the face, with a reference to the Covington High School story there. What do you think about that?
I'm not a big fan of David Frum, but he's kind of right. Look, the Democrats did really well last cycle. You got to give it to them. But if you look at where they won in these Trump districts, in my state of Virginia, they picked up a handful of seats. And it was those folks that ran to the middle, that talked about areas where they could be more fiscally conservative, that talked about national security, then were able to make a competitive case against the Republican incumbent in many instances. That's where I think they win. And the funny part is that they succeeded throughout so many House districts by running that strategy, and yet the lesson that many of their presidential candidates are taking is, instead of going more to the center and talking exactly like that, they're pivoting to the left and going to the extreme. So it's ironic that they actually did well this past election in so many areas of the country through a centrist message, and then tack to the left immediately after.
Well, I mean, that's the story of primaries, essentially. But when you take a look at what Schultz is saying, and I don't know, you know, time will tell and voters will decide if he's that person. I think anybody who would run as sort of a third-party candidate would have to be so charismatic and have such a strong identity that they were able to potentially do that. But what he's saying is, look, these folks are way too far to the left, and these folks who are on the right who aren't satisfied with President Trump are potentially people that you could peel off, as Frum says, the softest supporters. So he's looking to build a constituency in that crowd.
Correct, and I think that I don't dismiss independent candidates doing well, although we haven't really seen one since John Anderson and Ross Perot. I mean, they kind of happen every decade or so. But the reality is, I'm not one of these people that like Mike Bloomberg and everyone, who dismisses them out of hand in terms of their ability to potentially win. Look, Donald Trump bested 17 amazing candidates, blew through the system when no one gave him a chance. So we are living in a world now where there are larger-than-life personalities that can do stuff. Schultz's background as a successful CEO, definitely, and he's got billions of dollars, so he can self-finance this thing. I think he's a credible candidate, don't get me wrong. I just think that his past history of doing this doesn't allow him to go after that right-leaning folks. He might be charismatic, but at the end of the day, they're going to say you're a progressive.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that remains to be seen whether or not he really connects with people. Quick thought on Kamala Harris. When people think of crowd size, they sometimes think of you, Sean. And she had 20,000 people out there. Pretty impressive showing. She was in Oakland. She was in her home territory. What do you make of that in and of itself as a data point?
Well, look, I hate to say this, but it was a big crowd, right?
It was a big crowd.
It was a really big crowd, and I give her credit. There are people that are exciting. She is someone who, there's no question, people are enthusiastic about on the left, and she has done a great job of energizing those folks. That speaks volumes. When you look, and you mentioned it earlier, I mean, this is like they're going from the Olympic-sized pool to I don't know what, because you've gotten now 30, 40-plus candidates that are jumping in. For her to have that degree of enthusiasm, I think portends well for her, and I think people are excited about her. She's clearly tapped into something. So as these other candidates on the left look at what they're going to do to announce or be different than whatever, now they've got to realize that she's kind of set the bar for other candidates going forward. But she's done so. She's shown that you've got to have that combination of charisma, excitement, commitment to the extreme left.
She has generated that, to be sure, and I think you're right. A lot of some other candidates might take a look at her and say, "Well, maybe I'll wait a while and see if something happens, if she flames out, or where this goes." Sean, thank you. Good to see you as always. Thanks for being here tonight. Here now, Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist and Fox News contributor, and Evan Bayh, former Democratic senator and from Indiana and former governor of Indiana.